Okay, so it's been about 3 weeks since we burned the meadow at the end of March. We're around April 10th or so now. Let's see how things have greened up. We've had quite a few warm days, sunny days. It's been an earlier spring than normal, but also spells of cold and overnight frost. Most of what we see greened up here is going to be non-native leftover bits of pasture grasses and a lot of fescue that have moved into the meadow through the pathway or accidental seeding. And you'll see the big swaths and bands of it. That's what I'm looking to run a little experiment on, is go through and use some glyphosate and spray off certain areas of the what is greened up now, and do it side by side with other spots that won't be sprayed off. And we'll see what the difference is in the native vegetation that comes up. So pretty cool as we walk through. You look at the burned ground from 3 weeks ago. You see all the little seedlings popping up. Little dandelions show their face, which you normally don't even see in here because they're underneath such tall vegetation, but they're responding to the disturbance. Also really neat, you see these little clusters of snail shells and holes. You know, when you see these clumps here, that's actually our native grasses. We have a lot of panic, big blue, little blue, Indian grass. And you'll see the sections where they are, little clumps sort of all over the place, and they haven't started to green up yet. Or if they have, it's just barely. You'll see an example right here. Barely greening up at all. So it's a good time to do the glyphosate application as they haven't greened up, and we can't really wait any longer or we'll kill those off, which we don't want to do. The other interesting thing is, you know, where the non-native grasses are, it's pretty continuous, the coverage, especially when it fills in. But you look at the meadow during the season and you wouldn't realize just how much bare earth is between all the plants. You wouldn't think this when you look at it from far. But between each of these little grass clumps, these burnt grass clumps, there's a whole lot of just bare dirt. So there's a lot of place down at that ground level for insects and animals to move around. I think it's a very important place for different ground dwelling animals and insects that they live down and amongst that layer, versus a turf lawn or the fescue, and it doesn't really provide that. When this spot here fills in, it's just completely dense coverage. There's not really that room for that movement, even for ground birds to move along amongst the grasses and be able to scurry through or have nesting sites or escape areas. So that's pretty interesting. Another cool thing, you don't get to walk through and see the meadow like this too often, where it's just burnt right down. So it just looks pretty continuous, but sort of see little spots here where there's a bit of a drainage line that's carved itself over time, just from rainwater and spring melt. Falls right through and over to the corner of the property. And a lot of these big anthills, big giant anthills that build up over several years. Some of them are, you know, pretty near 2 feet tall, and you don't know they exist unless you get this down to this bare state to have a look at it. So that's pretty interesting. Another big one here right by the side of the path. And this section here, as you can tell by the number of little burnt clumps of what are our native grasses, which makes sense because throughout the year this section right here is one of the most chock full of Indian grass and panic grass, and one of the nicer looking grassy sections. And then into the middle it's more wildflowers, so you can tell it just doesn't have those clumps with it, the occasional large one, and then those big swaths of fescue that have moved through the meadow. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray a bunch of this off, and then throughout the year we can keep an eye on it and see what kind of a difference it's made to the composition of the meadow here, and how that it might be interesting to observe. So stay posted and we'll watch how this evolves over the course of the year.